75 years old, and I need to tell you something important that I've never told anyone before. I haven't told my children, I haven't told my sister, I haven't told anyone. When my husband Richard died 2 years ago, the people who came to the funeral kept coming up to me. Your marriage was so beautiful, 31 years, that's so rare nowadays. I smiled. I thanked them, I hugged them, and inside I thought, if only it had been what you said it was. The night that changed everything wasn't dramatic. There was no big fight. No plates were thrown. No one raised their voice. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Dinner had been eaten. Richard was watching the evening news on television. I was doing the dishes. Then the television went quiet. I turned around and saw Richard looking at me. It wasn't the look of someone angry. It wasn't the look of someone in love. He was just looking, and very quietly he said, "Helen, I've been alone in this house for 30 years. Then he got up and went to the bedroom. I stood there, hands still wet. The kitchen was completely silent, and something in my chest dropped, because the first thing that came to my mind wasn't "that's not true." My first thought was, me too. Growing up, I was taught that a good woman builds a good home. That was it. That was the entire manual. Keep the house clean, feed the children, make your husband comfortable. Do these things and you're a success. Do these things and you are loved. Do these things and you are enough. And I believed it. I genuinely, wholeheartedly believed it. It never even crossed my mind to question it. Because everything around me said the same thing. My mother, the neighbors, the magazines, the entire voice of that era, they all pointed in the same direction, so I built exactly that. A good home, dinner at 6:30 every evening, ironed shirts, birthdays were never forgotten, Christmas was organized, summer vacations were planned, 2 children were raised, educated, and sent out into the world. I did everything right, and by doing everything right, my life completely disappeared. Here's what no one tells you. Being the person who holds everything together erodes you from the inside, quietly, gradually, not in one great shattering moment, but in that silent repetition where days start to resemble each other and mornings run in the same sequence. When you are constantly managing, you stop feeling, because feeling takes time. To feel, you have to stop and ask yourself, what do I actually want right now? What hurts? What is missing? I never stopped, not like a machine that never stops. I always had a plan, something to prepare, something to organize, something to handle. My list never ended, and when I completed the list, I felt good about myself. I had done my duty. I had been enough. For 30 years, I kept the engine running. I just forgot to check whether anyone was in the car. Richard was not a cruel man. I want to say this clearly, because in stories like this, people immediately start looking for a villain. There is no villain here. He wasn't absent from our lives the way some husbands are. He came home, he sat at the dinner table, he came to school plays, graduations, Christmases. He showed up to all kinds of events. From the outside, everything was in its proper place. But there is a difference between being present and truly being present. That difference is hard to put into words. You are physically in the same room, yet somewhere there is an invisible glass wall between you. You hear each other, but you don't really listen. I understood that difference far too late. Every evening he would sit across from me at dinner, and I would talk about the children, the neighbors, things that needed to be done. He would nod, he would respond, then he would drift back to that dead-end place inside his head, and I would drift back into mine, and we both called this a life, and I allowed it to happen. Every night, for years, I allowed it, because somewhere, at some point, I stopped expecting more. I adjusted myself. I made peace with less. I called it maturity. Now I call it surrender. After Richard said what he said that Tuesday night, I went nearly 2 weeks without addressing it, acting as though nothing had happened. I covered it up. I made breakfast in the mornings, cooked dinner in the evenings. Everything moved along as usual. 2 weeks. I carried those words inside me for 2 weeks, while doing the dishes during the day, while trying to sleep at night. I've been alone in this house for 30 years. The sentence kept circling inside me, but I couldn't open my mouth. You see how deeply habit has taken root. Even when something had cracked between us, my instinct was always the same. Cover it up, preserve the peace. Don't let something worse come of it. This reflex was so automatic I wasn't even aware of it. I simply did it. Then one morning, he was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee. I went and sat across from him and said, "Tell me what you meant." He was surprised, as though he had forgotten what he'd said or assumed I had decided to forget it too. He was quiet for a long time. His gaze settled somewhere on the corner of the table. Then he said, "I never felt like you wanted to know me, Helen. You wanted to worry about me. You were very good at worrying about me, but that's not the same thing. I wanted to argue. My throat was full of objections. I asked how your day went. I kept everything you mentioned in my mind. I stood behind you in every decision you made, but I said none of it, because there, looking at his face, this man I had shared a bed with for 30 years, I realized I didn't know what his voice sounded like when he was truly happy. I didn't know what he was afraid of. I didn't know what he thought about when he couldn't sleep. I knew how he took his coffee. I knew his shirt size. I knew which doctor he saw, which medications he took. I knew everything about him, everything except himself. For 2 years there has been a question sitting inside me. What is the difference between loving someone and treating someone well? Because I treated Richard quite well, very well. No one can argue with that. But whether I truly loved him, I am no longer certain. Not the way love is supposed to be. Not with genuine curiosity. Not with that kind of interest that says, "You are a mystery to me and I want to spend my life learning you." I think I loved the idea of him, not him. I loved his function. I loved his stability. I loved the order, the predictability, the sense of safety he brought to my life. I think I loved being a wife more than I loved being his wife. I loved the role. And sometimes the role takes up more space in a person's life than the person themselves. To understand this about yourself when there is not much life left, that is a very painful thing. You cannot go back. You cannot fix it. You can only look and understand. Our last few years together were very different from all the others. After that morning conversation, something changed, at first in small ways, then more. I began asking things I had never asked before, real questions. Not "how was your day" kinds of questions, ones that came from somewhere deeper. What did you want to be when you were young, before everything was decided and determined for you? Is there something you've never told anyone? Is there something you regret? The first few times he looked at me strangely, as though he were waiting for a trap. These kinds of questions hadn't been asked in years. Why were they being asked now? Was there an agenda? Was this the beginning of an argument? There was no trap. I simply finally wanted to know. And he told me quiet things, things that had accumulated over decades with nowhere to go. At 19, he had wanted to be a journalist. He had written for the university newspaper, thought maybe this was it, maybe this was the thing. Then his father fell seriously ill. He went into the family business and never looked back, or tried not to look back. The day our son left for university, he had cried in his car, alone, in a hardware store parking lot. He didn't know why. He felt that something was ending, but couldn't name it. He sat there for a long time. Then he came home and said nothing. His whole life he had been afraid of being forgotten, of living and passing through, leaving nothing meaningful behind. That fear had never left him. Every night before sleep, it was there, somewhere. 31 years, and I was hearing all of this for the first time. He died 14 months after those conversations began. Heart failure. It was fast, the doctors said. He didn't suffer long. I was with him at the end, holding his hand tightly, and I keep turning those 14 months over in my mind. How different they were from everything that came before. How much more real, how much less alone we both were. 14 months out of 41 years together, that was all I had. 14 months of truly, fully knowing him. That accounting still takes my breath away. Every morning it takes my breath away. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm not here to earn your pity. I'm not telling it to feel sorry for myself either. At least I'm trying not to. I'm telling you this because I see it everywhere. I see it in my children's marriages. I see it in my friends. I see it in strangers at restaurants, sitting across from each other, both looking at their phones. They're not looking at each other. They're not asking each other anything. Two people, the same house, the same bed, the same last name, completely alone, and no one says anything because it's comfortable, because it technically works, because the bills are being paid, the vacations are being managed, and from the outside it looks like a life, and that's considered enough. It goes unquestioned, but comfort is not connection, and managing a life together is not the same as sharing one. These are two very different things, and sometimes understanding the difference comes far too late. I want to ask you something, and before I go on, I want you to really think about it carefully. Don't rush. Truly think. When was the last time you asked your spouse something real? Do you remember? Not logistics, not schedules, not what are we having for dinner or did you pay the bill? Something real. What are you afraid of? What do you miss about who you used to be? Is there something you're carrying inside you that I don't know about? When was the last time you sat with the person you love and were genuinely, completely curious about what is going on inside them? Not as a problem to be solved, but as a human being to be understood. If you're struggling to remember, that is not an accusation. That is information, important information. That is where the gap lives, right there. That is where loneliness grows, not in big fights, in small silences, in questions that were never asked, in answers that could never find room to exist. Richard is gone now. The house is in a silence I could never have imagined before, different from the silence after the children left, heavier, more permanent. It settles in and stays. Some mornings I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and I keep thinking about that Tuesday night, his face in the light of the television, how quietly he said it, as though he had been carrying it for years and had finally filled up and emptied himself out. There was nothing dramatic about it, no anger, he was just tired. I've been alone in this house for 30 years. I wish I had heard it differently in that moment, not as something already done and finished, as something that could still be fixed. Maybe if I had knocked on the bedroom door that same night and said, "Tell me," maybe without waiting 2 weeks. We did have time, as it turned out. We used it in the end. Not enough, but some. Just 14 months. I am grateful for that. I am trying to hold on to it. But I want more than a little for you. I want you to start now, not once the next hard stretch has passed, not once things settle down, not once you have more energy or more time or whatever it is you're waiting for. Now, go home tonight and ask someone you love a real question, then truly listen to the answer they give without preparing your response. Without steering them, just listen. That's it. That's all. It sounds simple. It isn't, but it is worth more than anything else I could say to you. I know this now. I just learned it 30 years too late. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. See you next time.